Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Phyllis Summers had always known that Genoa City was a city of secrets, backstabbings, and hidden dockets, but nothing could have prepared her for what she stumbled upon that cataclysmal night. She had gone to the Abbot Manse, presumably to deliver a communication, but her instincts told her commodity was amiss long before she indeed situated her auto. The moon cast creepy murk across the impeccably manicured meadows, and the night air carried a pressure that set her jitters on edge. Kane had been acting strangely all week, distant and distracted, and when Phyllis eventually caught up to him near the private study, she tasted that the calm face of their lives was about to shatter. Her heart contended as she crept closer, hoping to block a discussion or maybe offer the support that she tasted Kane desperately demanded. But what she heard rather set her blood and shattered any sense of security she had left. Victor Newman's voice, cold and controlled, cut through the night like a cutter, and beside him, Jack Abbott's own tone was laced with an icy imminence she had no way heard before. Phyllis's palpitation pounded in her cognizance as she realized the unbelievable. Kane was in peril, and the two men she had formerly considered pillars of the community were the lyricists of commodity minatory. The details were hazy at first, masked by adrenaline and unbelief, but the sight that unfolded before her eyes was insolvable to ignore. Kane, her Kane, was floundering, a fight for survival etched into every hopeless movement, but Victor's advised strength and Jack's brutal effectiveness left him vulnerable, exposed, and helpless. Phyllis's hand shook, gripping the edge of the study doorway as she plotted to comprehend the horror of what she was witnessing. The sound of a struggle, muffled yet horrifyingly clear, resounded in her mind as if slow stir had taken over reality itself. She wanted to scream, to run, to intermediate, but the shock of the moment paralyzed her, and the instinct for tone preservation kept her firm in place. Kane's eyes met hers for a transitory moment, a silent plea, a blend of pain, fear, and treason, and it was in that alternate that Phyllis knew her life and the course of Genoa City itself had changed ever. Victor, ever the master manipulator, executed his plan with cold perfection, while Jack, caught in a dangerous alliance of convenience and ambition, delivered blows that Kane couldn't repel. The room sounded to constrict around Phyllis, every sound amplified Kane's faltering breath, the creak of the floorboards, the muffled crash of cabinetwork as despair collided with brutality. Her mind contended, how could she have been so near to the center of this agony without realizing it? How could two men, who had applied power for decades, sink to similar depths of atrocity? And yet, there it was, Kane lying motionless on the bottom, the life she had known so privately slipping away before her eyes, leaving only the stark, cold reality of treason. Her casket tensed as she tried to fight back gashes, the shock mingling with rage and unbelief, the admixture forming a storm that hovered to consume her from within. Victor and Jack didn't notice her cashing in the murk. Their focus was solely on icing Kane's demise, a fatal misstep in a game that had always been about control and dominance. Phyllis's mind contended, how could she use what she had seen? How could she survive this night, carry the verity, and yet remain alive to expose the darkness that had claimed Kane? Her first study was unbelief, also horror, also a burning desire for justice that transcended her fear. She had seen too much, witnessed too nearly, and now bore the responsibility that could either destroy her or save the megacity from a crime so heinous it defied belief. As the final moments of Kane's life unfolded, Phyllis realized that her life, and the lives of everyone around her, would no way be the same. Every plan, every alliance, every moment of trust had atrophied in a moment, leaving only chaos, grief, and the necessary shadow of Victor and Jack's business. When they eventually left, confident that their crime had gone unseen, Phyllis staggered from her caching place, her body shaking, her mind a whirlwind of grief, fear, and determination. Kane was gone, but she had a charge now, an implacable need to hold Victor and Jack responsible for the horror they had foisted. Every corner of Genoa City suddenly sounded dangerous, every familiar face potentially a trouble, and every tale carried the weight of a megacity teetering on the point of reproach. Phyllis knew she'd need abettors, but trust was a currency she could no longer go, and the burden of knowledge pressed down on her like a weight that hovered to crush her at any moment. She allowed of the moment she had first met Kane, the horse laugh they had participated, the love that had flourished, and the life they had pictured of erecting together, gone in the blink of an eye, stolen by men whose ambition knew no bounds. But indeed in the depths of despair, Phyllis's resoluteness hardened. She'd not let Kane's death be in vain, she'd not allow Victor and Jack to apply their power unbounded, to continue manipulating and destroying lives with immunity. She pledged to expose them, to bring the verity to light, indeed if it meant risking her own life in the process. Phyllis's mind contended with strategies, with plans to gather substantiation, with ways to turn the tables on the men who had stolen everything from her. And yet, fear remained, fear of discovery, fear of retribution, sweat that the megacity that had formerly been her home would come a grave of secrets and falsehoods. Night after night, Phyllis replayed the scene in her mind, the creepy image of Kane lying helpless while Victor and Jack executed their plot over and over, fueling her determination to act. She began to collute out every detail: the route they had taken, the positions they had held, the sounds, the expressions, the subtle tells that could serve as substantiation. Every nuance came an indication, every observation an armament in her magazine. But she also knew that time was against her. Victor's conglomerate, Jack's influence, the maze of dishonesty, they were redoubtable opponents, able of silencing anyone who hovered their precisely constructed world. And yet, the fire within Phyllis couldn't be quenched. She reached out cautiously, first to those she trusted most, abettors whose fidelity she had tested in the history, revealing just enough of the verity to gauge their responses, to determine who could help her expose the darkness that had claimed Kane. Dubitation, of course, was a constant companion. She learned snappily to guard her words, to speak in half-trueness, to use her feelings as disguise while strictly planning her counterpunch. The megacity sounded unconscious to the blood that had been revealed, the lives that had been irrevocably altered, the secret that Phyllis carried with her like a ticking time lemon. Each meeting, each casual discussion, each putatively innocent commerce came an occasion to ripen information, to test commitment, to position herself for the ultimate disclosure. And all the while, the memory of Kane, his laugh, his touch, his unvarying support, visited her, propelling her forward with a force that sweat alone couldn't contain. Sluggishly, designedly, Phyllis began to unravel the vestments of Victor and Jack's plan, making together motives, defenses, and openings, turning her immediate substantiation into an armament of justice. Her battle would not be unforeseen, not impulsive, it would be precise, calculated, and ruinous, leaving no room for denial, no avenue for escape. The night she had formerly stressed would consume her came the design for her triumph. And when the time came, Phyllis faced Victor and Jack with a calm that belied the storm inside her, the weight of Kane's death converted into power, her voice steady, her aspect unwavering. The substantiation she presented, the details she reported, left no mistrustfulness in the minds of anyone who heard her. Kane had been boggled, and the lawbreakers were Victor Newman and Jack Abbott. Shock, outrage, and unbelief gurgled through Genoa City like campfire, but Phyllis held her ground, her courage fueled by grief, love, and an implacable desire for justice. Victor, formerly untouchable, set up himself exposed, possessed by the very woman he'd undervalued, while Jack, inversely reproachable, realized that power could no longer shield him from responsibility. The megacity watched as the tables turned, as secrets were revealed, and as the consequences of ambition, rapacity, and treason were laid bare. Phyllis, ever changed, stood as a testament to adaptability, frippery, and the unyielding pursuit of verity in a megacity where falsehoods had formerly reigned supreme. Kane's death was a tragedy, a crack that could no way completely heal, but through Phyllis's courage, his story, and the verity of Victor and Jack's crimes, would not be forgotten, a heritage that assured justice, indeed in a world as dark and dangerous as Genoa City. And as the dust settled, the megacity could no longer ignore the power of one woman determined to bring light to the murk, to ensure that no matter how deep the deception, the verity would always find a way to shine through. Phyllis had witnessed the unbelievable, survived the unconceivable, and surfaced stronger, smarter, and more redoubtable than ever ahead, a force that Victor and Jack could no way completely contain, a reckoning that had been a long time coming, and a memorial that in Genoa City, no bone, not indeed the most important, was untouchable. The shock of witnessing Kane's brutal murder dallied in Phyllis Summers' mind like an endless scar, a grim echo of a night that would define the rest of her life. She could still see Kane's eyes, wide with unbelief and pain, meet hers just before the final, fatal moment, a silent plea that sounded to ask her to save him, indeed though she had been helpless to do so. The image visited her relentlessly, intruding into her every study, every waking moment, until she could no longer distinguish reality from memory. For hours subsequently, she remained retired in the murk, pulsing, her body paining from the pressure, her mind contending through every possible script that could have averted the tragedy. But as the original shock began to subside, it was replaced by a burning determination Kane's death could not, and would not, be in vain. She had seen the verity, the ultimate treason, and it had to be brought to light, no matter the cost. Phyllis knew that acting impulsively could get her killed. Victor Newman was a man who had made an conglomerate erected on manipulation, intimidation, and an imperturbable sense of superiority. Jack Abbott, while more subtle in his approach, had just proven that he could sink to unconceivable depths when rapacity and ambition demanded it. Together, the two men had orchestrated a murder that would shoot shockwaves through Genoa City, but they had undervalued one thing: Phyllis Summer's adaptability. The first step, she realized, was survival. She demanded to vanish from their radar long enough to gather the substantiation that would ensure Victor and Jack could no way deny the verity. She'd come a ghost, moving in silence, watching, hearkening, recording, and establishing every shred of evidence she could find. In the days that followed, Phyllis walked a dangerous tightrope, precisely maintaining her public countenance while intimately twisting into a scrupulous disquisition. She began retracing Kane's last movements, reconsidering every discussion, every meeting, and every commerce he'd had with Victor and Jack. She canvassed connections subtly, posing as herself while masking her true intentions, seeking out anyone who had been unwittingly drawn into the murderous web that had entangled Kane. Each detail she uncovered painted a clearer picture of premeditation and conspiracy. Victor, ever the strategist, had manipulated Jack's pride, persuading him that barring Kane was necessary to cover their business and particular interests. Jack, torn between fidelity, rapacity, and fear, had eventually succumbed to Victor's influence, carrying out the violent act that changed the line of everyone's lives in Genoa City. But Phyllis also had to navigate her own inner fermentation. She plotted with swells of guilt, wondering if she could have acted else, if she had ever missed a warning sign, if she had ever allowed Kane to die in her presence. Nights were the hardest. She'd lie awake, reliving the moment over and over, feeling the weight of Kane's death pressing down on her casket like a physical force. The image of his breathless body visited her dreams, each agony more pictorial, more visceral than the last. Her grief was a constant companion, but it was also an energy, a grim driving force that pushed her to prepare for the battle she knew had to come. Phyllis's first strategic step was to secure evidence that would repel scrutiny. She trolled surveillance footage, addressed into communication records, and enlisted discreet help from trusted abettors who could corroborate her story without drawing attention. Every document, every videotape clip, every subtle distinction came an armament in her magazine. She knew that revealing Victor and Jack's crime precociously could effect in her own death, or worse, her evidence being dismissed as the visions of a woman traumatized by grief. She had to move precisely, surgically, with a perfection that matched the ruthless styles of the men she was targeting. Meanwhile, Victor and Jack remained unconscious to the storm brewing behind unrestricted doors. Confident in their control, they went about their lives as if Kane's death had neatly tied up any loose ends. Victor, with his usual arrogance, treated the incident as a minor handicap in the larger game of commercial dominance, while Jack tried to explain his conduct to himself, persuading himself that it had been necessary, that Kane's elimination was an unfortunate but necessary step in conserving the Abbott heritage. They didn't know that Phyllis had come a silent bloodsucker in the murk, observing, calculating, and preparing to strike. Every word they spoke, every movement they made, was entered in Phyllis's mind. She learned their erraticisms, their patterns, their vulnerabilities, storing them for the ineluctable battle. As days turned into weeks, Phyllis began precisely testing the waters, discreetly planting questions and watching for responses, gauging which of her familiarity could be trusted to support her once the verity was revealed. She discovered abettors in unanticipated places, people who had their own grievances against Victor and Jack, who had long felt tyrannized or manipulated by their schemes. These abettors came pivotal to Phyllis's plan, furnishing not only moral support but also access to coffers and networks that would be necessary to hold the two men responsible. Throughout it all, Phyllis plotted to attune her grief with her need for revenge. There were moments when wrathfulness hovered to consume her, when every instinct screamed at her to defy Victor and Jack incontinently, to unleash her fury and expose their crimes intimately. But Phyllis understood the stakes. Impulsive action could effect in her death, or worse, allow the perpetrators to cover their tracks. She reminded herself of Cain's final look, the silent plea, and the love they had participated. She'd recognize his memory not with reckless violence, but with calculated justice. Eventually, the moment arrived. Phyllis had gathered irrefragable substantiation, videotape clips, recorded exchanges, fiscal deals linking Victor and Jack to Cain's death, and substantiation statements from those who had intentionally been involved in the scheme. She arranged a meeting, precisely orchestrated, where Victor and Jack would be brazened with the full weight of their crimes. The battle was nothing short of explosive. Phyllis entered the room, calm and poised, the personification of controlled fury. Her voice chimed clear and unvarying as she reported the events of that cataclysmal night, presenting every piece of substantiation with perfection. Victor's arrogance faltered, his countenance cracking under the weight of evidence, while Jack's confidence dissolved into fear, the precisely constructed pretenses he'd cleaved to worsening before his eyes. Phyllis's performance was both mesmerizing and intimidating, a masterclass in controlled battle. She laid out the timeline, the motives, the conduct, and the consequences, leaving no room for denial. The room sounded to shrink around Victor and Jack, every word Phyllis spoke tensing the mesh of responsibility. Shockwaves gurgled through the room, through the company, and through Genoa City itself. Workers rumored, neighbors wagged, and the megacity watched as one woman held the most important men in city responsible for a crime that could have remained retired ever. Yet indeed as Victor and Jack faced exposure, Phyllis knew the battle was far from over. Their pride, influence, and connections would not allow them to simply surrender. Legal maneuvering, commercial pitfalls, and social manipulation came the coming phase of the war, but Phyllis was prepared. She had anticipated every eventuality counterattack, every attempt to discredit her, and she met each with a combination of substantiation, strategic alliances, and sheer tenacity. Through it all, Phyllis's grief no way completely faded. Cain's absence was a constant pang, a memorial of the cost of power, ambition, and treason. But she converted that grief into strength, a force that enabled her to outthink men who had undervalued her, who had assumed her fear would render her helpless. Rather, she became a symbol of adaptability, determination, and the pursuit of justice in a megacity where similar ideals were frequently overshadowed by rapacity and dishonesty. The fate of her battle left Victor and Jack reeling, their reports shaken, their authority challenged, and their crimes exposed to a megacity that had long deified them. Phyllis Summers surfaced not only as a survivor but as a victor in her own right, a woman who had faced unconceivable horror, navigated unfaithful waters, and eventually held those responsible. And though the pain of losing Cain would no way truly fade, Phyllis set up a measure of peace in knowing that she had recognized his memory through courage, intelligence, and an unvarying commitment to the verity. Genoa City would no way forget the night Cain failed or the woman who stood up to the men who took him from the world. Phyllis's name came synonymous with frippery, adaptability, and the power of one existent to stand against indeed the most redoubtable forces. And as she moved forward, determined to rebuild her life while keeping Cain's memory alive, she carried with her assignment that could no way be cancelled in a megacity erected on secrets and falsehoods. The verity always finds a way, and those who dare to apply it with courage can change the course of everything. Indeed, as the immediate battle with Victor and Jack left the megacity reeling, Phyllis knew her work was far from over. Exposing them in a room filled with evidence was one thing, but icing that justice would follow in a world where power and plutocrat frequently trumped verity was another entirely. She spent long hours poring over legal documents, working with trusted attorneys, and still consulting with law enforcement connections she knew could be reckoned upon. Every step had to be indefectible. One misstep could undo all the progress she had fought so hard to achieve, and Victor and Jack were experts at exploiting indeed the lowest vulnerability. The particular risk was immense. Each night, Phyllis replayed Kane's last moments in pictorial detail, an internal circle she could neither escape nor ignore. Occasionally she'd hear his voice in the silence of her apartment, brooding stimulant or contending for her to survive, to fight, to be strong. Grief and rage mingled into a potent blend, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. She came regular, nearly ruthless in her pursuit of justice, strictly establishing every discussion, every suspicious move by Victor and Jack, and every supporter who could strengthen her case.